Welcome back to Spider Red. I'm going to continue this series about how it would change college football. Part one was about the super conferences. I moved the power of five to the power of three, removing the Pac 2 and the ACC. If you want to catch up, go back and watch that video. I also created a new coalition for college athletics, the CCA. I created that to replace the NCAA. And now we're going to move into part two, which is NIL. Everyone knows by now that NIL, the name, image, and likeness, is taking over college football. And for good reason. I completely agree with this. Maybe not to the extent where these kids are getting paid more than $1 million per, but if they have the means and a way to get those contracts with whatever company or booster or whatnot. So here's the breakdown of what I'm going to cover in this video. First, I'm going to just do a history on how horrible the NCAA has been versus some of the athletes. I'm going to briefly go over the lawsuits versus the NCAA and how the Supreme Court changed all of that. Then I'm going to get into what I think is coming, and I don't see a way around it, to help regulate NIL, and that is goodbye to amateur sports. We're going to get a salary cap, and I'm going to talk about why college football and basketball, maybe even going into baseball, needs a cap to help for a lot of reasons, and I'll go through that. And then I'm just going to go over some of the current NIL deals and how that would affect what I'm proposing for a salary cap. Okay, I'd like to cover a little bit of the history of the NIL and why it is important. So I'm going to start from my perspective of when I remember seeing things happening. My first person that I remember going against the NCAA was Brian Bosworth. He was a national champion with the Oklahoma Sooners. He was a star linebacker. He won 2 Buckets Awards. He was very outspoken. He had been suspended for steroids. And in the third quarter of a game, he took off his pads and he showed this t-shirt that the TV got a picture of. It said National Communist Against Athletes, Welcome to Russia. And of course at the top that acronym was NCAA. He was very vocal on why can't athletes make money off of their name, image, and likeness. Or, even getting a commercial because he was so popular. It didn't make sense. It's because NCAA is greedy, wants all the money, and that sums up a lot of these issues that I'm going to keep going through. And you might know Brian Bosworth as the sheriff from the Dr. Pepper commercial. He was the first one that I remember being outspoken versus the NCAA. My next example for just NCAA stupidity would be Jeremy Bloom. He was a wide receiver for the Colorado Buffaloes. At one point, he had the longest TD reception in their history with a 94-yarder. Bloom was also a skier and a very good one. He became the #1 mogul skier in the world. He was trying to get on the Olympic team. And this is what started all of his troubles with the NCAA. So the NCAA locks down everything for college athletes at the time. They couldn't make money on anything. So in 2002, he sued them to say, hey, can I keep my endorsements from skiing while I play football? And they said, no, you're not eligible to play football. Even though later on, Drew Henson got drafted by the Yankees and he was allowed to keep his, I think it's like $1.9 million signing bonus. But skiing is still amateur because the Olympics is amateur. And the NCAA, don't give me that crap. Like, they just wanted control. There was no freedom for any of the athletes. That's what Brian Bosworth was saying. It's so I just frustrates me to no end on how the NCAA was held for this long and people didn't do anything about it. The kid just wanted to keep his endorsements and still play football while he earned his scholarship. It's a free country. I think he should have been allowed to do that. I don't see how the NCAA got away with it for so long, but he lost his 2002 case where he was going to basically have to choose skiing or football, which I think was completely unfair. Now to one of the most important players in NIL. That would be Ed O'Banion, the basketball player for UCLA, who first started asking, why is a player on a video game with his exact likeness allowed to be placed in a video game without him receiving some kind of compensation? And I completely agree. He is, to me, kind of like a true pioneer for NIL because he started a class action lawsuit versus the NCAA, which I'm going to get into next. Remember Ed O'Banion. He was a major player on why it is where it is today, and he should receive a lot of credit for that. Okay, the last examples I'm going to go through kind of quickly. It's still just the ridiculousness continues for the NCAA, and I just kind of wanted to point it out. The first one was Reggie Bush, USC running back. His Heisman was taken away because they said his family accepted some cash. Give me a break. Every college was doing it. They just got caught. One of the greatest running backs of all time in college football. God, he was so fun to watch. Man, just give his Heisman back. Good grief, this is getting ridiculous. The next one was our own Bulldog, A.J. Green. He was one of our wide receivers. He got suspended for 4 games for selling his jersey for $1,000. Good gracious. Does anybody remember this tattoo? Terrell Pryor and 4 other players got suspended because they exchanged for some money to get tattoos. There's a lot more examples out there. Another one I can give you too. If you go to a Georgia game, you will see the number 34 everywhere. It's Herschel Walker. Herschel should be getting a lot of compensation for how many jerseys Georgia has sold with that number 34. A lot of times they don't put his name on the back and they just put 34, but everybody knows who that is. Anyways, I was just trying to prove a point of how ridiculous it is that some of these kids didn't get compensated. Let's move to the lawsuits. Ed O'Banion filed a class action lawsuit against the NCAA. Several players, actually a good bit of players, joined him in the class action lawsuit. In 2014, Judge Claudia Wilkin ruled that the NCAA's loan practice violated the Sherman antitrust laws. That was a big step because then that kind of led to EA Sports reaching a $60 million settlement with 25,000 players. They had stopped NCAA basketball in 2009. They had stopped the football in 2014. It was published in 2013. So EA had stopped all of that. A lot of that was due to this. But from 2014 until the Supreme Court in 2021 had a unanimous verdict saying that the NCAA was incorrect and NIL should be allowed, and that was in the NCAA versus Austin lawsuit. But it still took 7 years from 2014 ruling from that judge to the Supreme Court. O'Banion had started this lawsuit in 2009, so it effectively took 12 years to get this. The leadership of the NCAA and our government, I'll leave it at that. I don't want to get too deep into that. I love history, and that's why I'm going over this, and it is very important to understand that. So let's look at what I would propose, and that's a salary cap for the NIL. Is there a perfect answer? Probably not, but it's going to have to come to this, I think, eventually. It's kind of the Wild West right now. They're going to have to regulate it somehow. I don't think a lot of this money would be sustainable. So this is what I would pitch. And look, the number might seem low, but in actuality, it's a lot of money, the example I'm going to use. You could use a 10 mil cap, 8 mil cap, 5 mil cap, 20 million cap, 50 million cap. But you got to understand, this would be all of the Division I schools. So a lot of these schools, just like some NFL teams, they might not be able to afford the full amount of the cap or use all of it. You would probably still have to have like a minimum, like you have to say 60% of the cap has to be full. But I think this would bring more parity into college football to get other SEC schools a chance to get some of these other players. I've got another idea that's going to combine with this, but let me go over the cap first. So let's just use an $8 million cap per team. There's 85 scholarship players. There's an average of probably about 118 players on a college team, but there's only 85 scholarship players, so I'm using that as an example. If we split the 8 million to the 85, that's 94,117 a piece for every 85th player. Or the NFL does, quarterbacks, running backs, defensive end, offensive lineman, defensive line, whatever. You could spread it out whatever you choose. Now look, they would still be allowed to get their endorsements or whatnot, say get some compensation if they're one of the top players for a jersey. And on top of the endorsements, they would still get their college tuition paid for. Let's look at tuition reimbursement. I pulled University of Georgia's tuition per year for a in-state student. Now, players get food meals and they get stipends for food before and after games and so forth. I'm not counting that. I'm literally just showing this as an example. It costs roughly $28K a year for a in-state student. If you add that $28K to the $94K, it's roughly $122K. Do you know how many people would love to make $122K a year? And that just shows that you add tuition to just that base $94K, and that $8 million would be plenty. Now, I know that we're not going to balance this out, so they might be getting more. But let's go ahead and take it one more step. Let's look at the non-Georgia residents. It actually costs them about $48K. So if you add that to the $94K, that's about $142,000, which is such a great value. Plus, you're getting an education. I can't stress that more. A lot of these kids are not going to make it to the NFL or any next level. I mean, maybe the UFL now that there's a good spring league. This is tremendous value, and like I said, a lot of people would love to be able to make that much a year, especially getting to play sports and get a degree. Let's look at an example for the salary cap. So we'll just use the University of Georgia's $8 million cap. So On3 has the top 100 players and what their NIL compensation is. If you look, these are the players that Georgia has in the top 100. Carson Beck is currently getting $1.5 million. Ernest Green is getting $675K. Ellis Robinson, who hasn't even played it down for Georgia yet, he's already getting $614. Trevor Etienne, who is transferring from Florida, is getting $569. KJ Bolden from Buford High School is a freshman. He hasn't played yet, but they're evaluating him at $559 is what he's getting. Tate Rutledge from Darlington is $558K. Justin Williamson, who flipped from us from Texas, he's a freshman linebacker. He's expected to get $544. And Malachi Starks, our stud cornerback, is $534K. So right now, that's $5.04 million worth of NIL just in those guys. So let's just say that's what they continue to get. Let's say Georgia was already under this cap, and this is what they were going to pay these guys. They'd only have $3 million for 77 players. That'd be about $38,000 per player, which is still good money. And you're still getting this tuition on the side too, and that's for non-residents or if you're from Georgia. So let me just take a stab. So what I did is I took 70% off the top of their NIL, and that's what Georgia would give them under the new cap. So Beck would get $450, Green $202, Robinson $184, ETN $170, Bolden, Rutledge at $167, Williams at $163, and Malachi Starks at $160, which is, golly, this, That's a lot of money for these kids still. That total for just those 8 players would be 1.6 mil, which would leave 6.3 million left for the other players at a $82,000 per player average, which we know that would not happen, but it would still give them plenty enough to spread around to some of your other stars, maybe like Ra Thomas or whatnot. And look, I am only looking at the top 100 guys, so these 8 kids were the only ones that I pulled. There could be a lot more making above, say, the 200,000 mark, but I'm just using this for example. Then on the side, I just keep want to, and I know in the past that you always got the tuition, but if you do 48K times how many years they stay in school, so Carson's actually going to graduate because he was behind Stetson Bennett. So he's still getting 192K worth of school plus a degree. Now, someone like KJ Bolden, which if he's really good, I doubt he'll stay. He'll probably go in the draft. But if he did, he would still get 112K worth of tuition plus that degree. We all know the average in the NFL is low. It's like 3 to 4 years. So you really want that degree so that you can move on. Maybe do a grad assistance, go into coaching, or go into whatever field you want to be in that they're studying for in school. I mean, there's only going to be a few of these 8 guys that have a long NFL career that's going to make a lot of money. And NIL is still providing them a lot of money. Let's just take Ernest Green. Let's say he stays 4 years at 200K, and for some reason something happens to his knee and he can't play in the NFL. He still made $800,000 in that 4 year. Plus, he's going to have a degree. I can't stress that enough. There's plenty of money to spend here. Plus, the $8 million would allow the other schools to be able to pay other players and bring them into the school and create more parity for college football. Lastly, I just want to show you some more examples of some of the other NIL deals. And again, I'm referencing On3. It's a website that does a lot of work on the NIL. I will reference their webpage in the description of this video. Let's take a look here though. The top 3 NIL deals are actually 3 different sports. You have Bronny, which we all know is LeBron's son. He's at 5.8 mil. Shedeur Sanders, which is Deion's kid, is at 4.7. And then there's actually a gymnast from LSU, Olivia Dunn, and she's at 3.5. Just to show you that it's not all football. And basketball actually has the top 1. Now, granted, the top 2 right now, their dad's fame is helping them get bigger deals, I'm sure. My third point, the last point, is 100 players are over 510K. And this is for football only. The top 100 players in NIL are all over the 510K mark. I'm not sure that that is sustainable over time. And that's why you need to go ahead and do a cap. Start capping for each school and bring more parity. And that's what I'm going to discuss in my next video. I'm going to combine the NIL cap and I'm going to make changes to recruiting and the transfer portal. I'm going to limit the portal and do some other things as well. And I'm going to cover that in my next video. Let me know if you like this idea or if you don't, if you have another idea. I'm not trying to politic here, but I would think this would open up so many jobs. Every school having a cap, you would have a lot of financial jobs, more recruiting because of how I'm going to do some of the next points. And the school and the conference would need help regulating and keeping up with all of this. Be on the lookout for my next video. It will be for recruiting in the transfer portal. Again, as always, thank you for listening to Spider Red. Tell somebody you love them today. Later.